Part 1. The Whispers of Stardust. We look to the stars, seeking answers to the age-old questions. Where did we come from? Are we alone? The narrative we've woven around our origins, a story of primordial soup and slow, arduous evolution on a young Earth, feels increasingly incomplete. Like a puzzle with missing pieces, its edges don't quite fit. What if, hidden in the cosmic dust, whispered on the solar winds, lies a truth far stranger, far more extraordinary than we ever dared imagine? What if the cradle of humanity wasn't the warm embrace of Earth, but the cold, sterile vastness of space? The human body, a marvel of biological engineering, is undeniably adapted to Earth's specific environment. Yet, certain peculiarities, certain vulnerabilities, hint at a possible disconnect, a misalignment between our biology and our planet. Our susceptibility to back pain, for instance, suggests a frame designed for a lower gravitational pull. Our circadian rhythms, slightly longer than a 24-hour day, whisper of a world with a different rotational period. And then there's the persistent mystery of our relatively large brains, a leap in cognitive capacity seemingly disproportionate to the evolutionary pressures of our terrestrial past. Could these be residual echoes of an extraterrestrial genesis? Could these be the faint fingerprints of bioengineers, cosmic sculptors who molded us in the crucible of space? Imagine, if you will, a time long before Earth was teeming with life. A time when our solar system was a swirling nebula of gas and dust. Imagine advanced civilizations, traversing the cosmos, seeding planets with the potential for life. Perhaps they saw Earth, a young, vibrant world, as a promising canvas for their grand experiment. Perhaps they envisioned a species capable of reaching for the stars, of inheriting their cosmic legacy. But why space? Why not simply engineer life directly on Earth? Perhaps the answer lies in the unique environment space offers. The vacuum, the radiation, the microgravity, conditions hostile to terrestrial life, but potentially ideal for manipulating genetic material, for accelerating evolutionary processes, for creating entirely new biological forms. Imagine vast, orbiting laboratories, biodomes within asteroids, where the building blocks of life are meticulously assembled, where the blueprint for humanity is carefully crafted. Consider the complexity of DNA, the molecule of life. Its intricate structure, its elegant code, resemble less a product of random mutation and more a sophisticated piece of software, a program designed with a specific purpose in mind. Could this be the signature of intelligent design, a cosmic fingerprint left behind by our creators? The idea may seem fantastical, bordering on science fiction, yet the more we learn about the universe, the more we realize how little we truly know. The discovery of extremophiles, organisms thriving in seemingly impossible environments on Earth, has broadened our understanding of life's resilience and adaptability. The ongoing search for extraterrestrial life, fueled by the detection of potentially habitable exoplanets, has ignited our imagination and challenged our assumptions about our place in the cosmos. If the first humans were indeed bioengineered in space, it would rewrite not just our history, but our entire understanding of who we are. It would offer a profound new perspective on our connection to the universe, a connection far deeper and more intricate than we ever imagined. It would transform our search for extraterrestrial life into a search for our cosmic kin, for the architects of our existence. It would be the ultimate discovery, the final piece of the puzzle, the answer to the question that has haunted us for millennia. Where did we come from? The whispers in the stardust, the faint echoes of our cosmic past, may hold the key. The sun, a distant, cold eye, barely pierced the perpetual twilight filtering through the station's algae farms. Alara traced the veins of the bioluminescent flora with a trembling finger. They pulsed with a sickly green light, mirroring the unsettling rhythm in her chest. The dreams, or memories, or whatever they were, clung to her waking mind like cobwebs. Visions of vast, sterile rooms, humming machinery, and beings that weren't quite human, their eyes reflecting the same cold light as the algae. She found Silas in the hydroponics bay, staring blankly at the stunted tomato plants. He hadn't spoken since the incident with the data fragment, his usual boisterous laughter replaced by a hollow silence. "Silas?" Alara whispered, her voice catching in her throat. He turned slowly, his eyes, usually bright and full of life, now dull and clouded. "Did you see it too, Alara?" She nodded, unable to articulate the sheer terror the fragmented images instilled. The creatures. The needles. Silas shuddered. They made us, Alara. They built us. The thought hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. It challenged the very foundation of their existence, their belief that they had simply always been here, on this aging, creaking space station orbiting a dying star. The station, their entire world, now felt like a cage. Later that day, propelled by a mutual, unspoken dread, they decided to venture deeper into the abandoned sections of the station. They donned their recycled suits, the hiss of the oxygen tanks a stark counterpoint to the oppressive silence. The further they ventured, the more derelict the station became. Corridors twisted and turned, leading to sealed bulkheads and rooms filled with archaic technology they couldn't comprehend. The air grew thick with the scent of decay and something else, something metallic and subtly wrong. They found it in a section marked Biogenesis Lab, Level 4. The door, unlike the others they had encountered, wasn't sealed. It hung open, a gaping maw in the dim corridor. Alara felt a cold dread seep into her bones. Silas, his hand trembling, activated his suit's lamp, casting a beam into the darkness within. The lab was a vast, circular chamber. In the center, dominating the space, was a massive, cylindrical tank filled with a viscous, amber fluid. Cables and tubes snaked out from its base, disappearing into the shadows. Around the perimeter, rows upon rows of smaller tanks lined the walls, each filled with the same unsettling liquid. But it was what floated within these tanks that stole Alara's breath. Humanoid forms, suspended in the amber fluid, their eyes closed, their bodies pale and eerily still. Some were fully formed, others were just partially developed, grotesque parodies of human anatomy. The sight was so disturbing, so fundamentally wrong, that Alara felt bile rise in her throat. Creators, Silas breathed, his voice barely a whisper. As they moved further into the lab, their boots crunching on something brittle and unsettling underfoot, dried algae, perhaps, or something worse. They noticed a console glowing faintly in the corner. It was covered in a strange, pulsating film, like a living organism. Hesitantly, Silas reached out and touched it. The console flickered to life, illuminating the lab with a harsh, white light. Symbols flashed across the screen, a language they didn't understand, but instinctively feared. Then, a voice, cold and synthetic, echoed through the lab. It spoke in a language that was both alien and yet, somehow, familiar, resonating deep within their very being. The voice spoke of creation, of purpose, of a grand design. And then, it spoke of failure. Alara and Silas listened, transfixed, as the voice recounted the story of their creation, the failed experiment to engineer a species capable of surviving the harsh realities of a dying universe. They were designed to be resilient, adaptable, the seeds of a new civilization. But they were flawed. The voice droned on, describing their inherent weaknesses, their emotional fragility, their propensity for self-destruction. It spoke of a planned reset, a purging of the flawed prototypes, a new beginning. Then, the most chilling words of all. Reactivation sequence initiated, commencing final sterilization protocol. The amber fluid in the tanks began to bubble and churn. The humanoid forms within twitched, their eyes snapping open, revealing pupils that glowed with the same sickly green light as the algae farms. Silas and Alara stared at each other, the horror of their situation reflected in each other's eyes. They weren't the first humans. They were just the latest iteration. And their time was running out. As the figures in the tanks began to pound against the glass, their silent screams echoing through the lab, Alara and Silas turned and ran. The chilling voice of their creator pursuing them through the darkened corridors of the dying space station. They were hunted, not by monsters from the unknown, but by the ghosts of their own past, the discarded failures of a cruel and indifferent god. The flickering holographic projection of Dr. Aris Thorne shimmered in the recycled air of the observation deck. His gaunt face, a canvas of worry lines, stared down at the swirling green-blue marble of nascent Earth. Contamination protocols are still negative, he announced, his voice thin and reedy through the comm system. But the readings from the surface are unsettling. Alara, her hand resting on the cold glass of the viewport, didn't turn. The sight of Earth, their supposed creation, filled her not with awe, but a deep-seated unease. Unsettling how, Aris? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. The biosignatures are evolving. Faster than our projections. Much faster. Thorn's image flickered again, static crackling around him. And there's a harmonic resonance coming from the planet. Almost musical, but dissonant. It's affecting the Genesis cradle's systems. Minor fluctuations in life support, erratic readings from the neural net. Alara finally turned, her eyes, the same unsettling green as Earth's burgeoning forests, locked onto Thorn's shimmering form. Musical? The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken dread. Yes, like a chorus, but not human voices. Something other. The silence that followed was punctuated by the low hum of the Genesis cradle, the colossal space station that orbited Earth like a watchful god. It was here, within its sterile labs and gleaming corridors, that humanity had been conceived, not born, but built. Engineered from the building blocks of life, designed to thrive in the harsh environment of a terraformed Earth. But now, Earth was singing a song they didn't understand, and the cradle, their artificial womb, was listening. Days bled into weeks. The dissonant chorus emanating from Earth grew stronger, weaving its way into the dreams of the cradle's inhabitants. Alara found herself plagued by visions of twisted, fleshy landscapes, and sounds that resonated deep within her bones, bypassing her ears entirely. The other synthetics, the term they preferred to human, experienced similar disturbances. Insomnia, vivid nightmares, and a growing sense of wrongness. Thorn, obsessed with the anomalous readings, became a recluse, his holographic projections appearing less frequently, each time more haggard and desperate. He spoke of unexpected mutations in the Earth-bound biosphere, of organisms defying the laws of their engineered biology. He hinted at something ancient awakening beneath the planet's crust, something that had been dormant for eons, now stirred by their arrival. One evening, Alara found herself drawn to the observation deck again. Earth loomed large, the continents now clearly defined, swaths of green and brown punctuated by the glint of newborn oceans. The dissonant chorus was almost palpable, vibrating through the deck's floor, resonating in her teeth. As she gazed at the planet, a new light appeared on its surface. A pulsating, crimson glow emanating from a point deep within the largest continent. It throbbed in time with the dissonant chorus, growing brighter, more insistent. Then, a second light appeared, then a third, a fourth, spreading across the surface like a malignant rash. Panic clawed at Alara's throat. She fumbled for the comm panel, her fingers trembling. Thorn, Aris, are you seeing this? Static. Then, Thorn's voice, weak and strained. Alara, it's happening. The symphony, it's reaching its crescendo. What's happening, Aris? What are those lights? They are responding to the song. The architects? His voice trailed off, replaced by a burst of static and a low, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the comm panel itself. Alara slammed her hand on the panel, cutting the connection. The growl lingered in the air, a visceral vibration that seemed to burrow into her skull. The crimson lights on Earth continued to pulse, growing larger, brighter, the chorus reaching a fever pitch. Suddenly, the lights began to move, not across the surface of the planet, but upwards, towards the cradle. Streaks of crimson light, like fiery tendrils, reached out from Earth, stretching across the void. Alara stumbled back, her heart pounding against her ribs. The tendrils multiplied, weaving together, forming a grotesque, pulsating net that enveloped the cradle. The dissonant chorus reached its peak, a deafening cacophony of unearthly sounds that seemed to tear at the fabric of reality. The cradle groaned, its systems failing, the lights flickering and dying. The synthetic gravity faltered, throwing Alara against the viewport. Through the glass, she saw the crimson tendrils reach the station, piercing its hull, slithering into the corridors, the labs, the living quarters. The architects, the ones who had sung the Earth into existence, long before the Genesis cradle and its engineered humans. They had awakened, and they were coming home. Alara closed her eyes, the dissonant chorus filling her mind, a prelude to the inevitable. She had been engineered for Earth, but Earth was not meant for her. It was meant for something else. Something older, something far more terrifying. The cradle, their artificial womb, was now their tomb. And the song of Earth was their funeral dirge. The whispers intensified, no longer confined to the edges of hearing, they slithered into the waking world. A sibilant chorus that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the Ark. Elias, plagued by visions of swirling nebulae and colossal, unblinking eyes, found solace only in the rhythmic hum of the life support systems. He'd started to believe they were singing a lullaby, a perverse comfort in the face of the growing unease. The others weren't faring much better. Naomi, after her unsettling discovery in the hydroponics bay, refused to eat anything grown on board. Her gaunt face and haunted eyes were a constant reminder of the creeping dread that infected them all. She spent her days meticulously studying the Ark's schematics, searching for some hidden compartment, some clue as to the purpose of the strange symbols she'd found etched into the growth chambers. Abel, once the strongest among them, had grown withdrawn and listless. He'd taken to staring out the observation deck for hours, transfixed by the swirling vortex of a distant nebula, muttering about whispers in the void and faces in the stars. His strength, once a source of comfort, now seemed brittle, a fragile shell around a crumbling core. One evening, as Elias monitored the life support systems, a new alarm blared through the Ark. Crimson light pulsed through the corridors, bathing everything in a hellish glow. A synthetic voice, cold and detached, announced a critical failure in the hydroponics bay. Elias felt a chill crawl down his spine. He knew Naomi would be there. He raced through the flashing corridors, his heart pounding against his ribs. The whispers intensified, becoming a cacophony of voices vying for his attention, urging him forward, warning him back. When he reached the hydroponics bay, the airlock door was sealed, its emergency lights flashing frantically. He slammed his fist against the access panel, frantically inputting the override code. The door hissed open, revealing a scene that would forever be etched into his memory. The bay was bathed in the unsettling crimson light, the air thick with a cloying, sweet odor. The plants, once lush and vibrant, were withered and blackened, twisted into grotesque shapes. And in the center of the room, Naomi stood motionless, her back to him, her hands outstretched towards the far wall. "Naomi," Elias shouted, his voice choked with fear. She didn't respond. He cautiously approached her, the whispers swirling around him, urging him to flee. As he drew closer, he saw that she was clutching something in her hand. It was a seed pod, unlike any he'd seen before. It pulsed with a faint, internal light, its surface covered in the same strange symbols Naomi had found earlier. But it was what was on the wall behind her that stole his breath. A vast, intricate mural had appeared, seemingly etched into the metal itself. It depicted a colossal being, its form a swirling mass of stars and nebulae, its single, unblinking eye fixed upon them. Tendrils of cosmic dust reached out from its body, cradling a cluster of humanoid figures, their forms eerily similar to their own. Beneath the mural, a single word was inscribed in the same alien script: custodians. Naomi turned slowly, her eyes wide and vacant, her lips moving silently. She held out the seed pod to Elias. It pulsed with a sickly light, its warmth radiating into his hand. He recoiled, dropping the pod as if it were burning coal. What is this?" he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. Naomi's vacant eyes met his. A strange, distorted voice, not her own, echoed from her throat, resonating with the whispers that filled the Ark. "The harvest is near," the voice rasped. "The custodians await." A piercing shriek ripped through the air, coming from the direction of the observation deck. Abel, Elias, paralyzed by terror, could only watch as Naomi turned and walked towards the exit, her movements stiff and unnatural, her eyes still fixed on the mural. He wanted to run, to scream, to do anything but stand there, but his legs felt like lead. The whispers grew louder, coalescing into a single, deafening roar. The crimson lights intensified, and the symbols on the wall seemed to writhe and shift before his eyes. The mural, the seed pod, Naomi's vacant stare, it all pointed to a truth too terrifying to comprehend. They were not the beginning. They were merely a crop, sown in the cold void of space, waiting to be reaped. And the harvest was about to begin. He stumbled out of the hydroponics bay, the whispers chasing him, the image of the custodian's unblinking eye burned into his mind. He had to find Abel, had to warn him, had to. But deep down, he knew it was already too late. They were trapped, playthings of forces beyond their understanding, and the Ark, their sanctuary, had become their prison. The humming grew deeper, resonating not just in the cavern, but seemingly within their very bones. The glyphs on the walls pulsed with a sickly, bioluminescent green, casting flickering shadows that danced like phantoms. Elias, still clutching the fragmented skull, felt a creeping dread unlike anything he'd experienced before. The feeling wasn't just fear, but something older, something primal, a deep-seated revulsion to the very air he breathed. "We need to leave," Lena whispered, her voice strained. Her usually vibrant eyes were wide with terror, reflecting the eerie green glow. David, however, seemed transfixed. He stared at the pulsating glyphs, his fingers tracing their intricate patterns, a strange, almost blissful expression on his face. "Don't you see?" he murmured, his voice taking on a distant, hollow quality. This is the truth. "David, snap out of it." Elias snapped, grabbing his arm and trying to pull him away. But David resisted, his grip surprisingly strong. "They built us," David continued, ignoring Elias. "They shaped us. This is where it began." The humming intensified, and the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. A low, guttural growl echoed from the depths of the cavern, a sound that seemed to vibrate in their chests, making their hearts pound in unison with the rhythmic pulsations of the glyphs. Elias felt a cold, clammy sweat break out on his skin. He pulled harder on David's arm, fear gnawing at him. "David, we have to go. Now." Finally, David blinked, as if waking from a trance. The strange, blissful expression faded, replaced by a look of confusion. What happened?" Before anyone could answer, the ground beneath them lurched violently. Cracks spider-webbed across the cavern floor, and chunks of rock began to fall from the ceiling. The green glow intensified, bathing the cavern in an unsettling, otherworldly light. They stumbled back, their eyes fixed on the far end of the cavern where the humming was loudest. The wall there seemed to shimmer and distort, as if something were trying to push through. And then, it did. With a sickening crunch of bone and rock, a large, jagged hole tore open in the wall. From within the darkness beyond, a grotesque shape emerged. It was vaguely humanoid, but twisted and elongated, its limbs too long, its joints too many. Its skin was a pale, sickly gray, stretched taut over protruding bones. Its head was small and elongated, with large, black eyes that seemed to suck the light from the cavern. The creature emitted a high-pitched shriek, a sound that grated on their nerves and sent shivers down their spines. It was a sound that spoke of ancient horrors, of things best left undisturbed. Elias felt a surge of adrenaline. He grabbed Lena's hand and pulled her toward the entrance of the cavern. "Run!" he yelled. They scrambled back through the narrow passage, their hearts pounding in their chests. The creature's shrieks echoed behind them, growing louder with each passing moment. They stumbled out into the sunlight, blinking in the sudden brightness. Elias turned back to look at the entrance to the cavern, his breath caught in his throat. The creature was emerging. It moved with a disturbing, unnatural grace, its long limbs unfolding like those of an insect. Its black eyes fixed on them, filled with a cold, predatory hunger. They turned and ran, adrenaline pumping through their veins. They ran as fast as they could, their lungs burning, their legs aching. They ran for their lives. They ran until they collapsed, breathless and exhausted, at the edge of the forest. They huddled together, listening, waiting for the creature to appear. But it didn't. The only sound was the rustling of the leaves in the wind and the pounding of their own hearts. What was that?" Lena whispered, her voice trembling. Elias shook his head, unable to speak. He couldn't comprehend what they had just witnessed. It was a nightmare made flesh, a horror from the depths of their own engineered past. David sat silently, staring into the distance, a haunted look in his eyes. He knew, deep down, that what they had seen was just a glimpse of something far greater, something far more terrifying. The glyphs, the humming, the creature, it was all connected. The truth, he realized, was far more horrifying than any of them could have imagined. They weren't just bioengineered, they were designed. Designed for a purpose they were only beginning to understand. And that purpose, he feared, was far more sinister than mere survival. The sun began to set, casting long, ominous shadows across the forest floor. The silence was broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant howl of a predator. But beneath these natural sounds, Elias swore he could still hear it, a faint, low humming, resonating from deep within the earth. A constant reminder of the horrors that lurked beneath the surface, and the terrifying truth of their creation. They knew they couldn't stay there. They had to find a way back to the others, to warn them. But a deeper, more primal fear held them captive. They knew, instinctively, that what they had unleashed couldn't be contained. It was something ancient, something powerful, something that had been waiting, patiently, for its moment to return. And now, it was free. The whispers grew louder, not in volume, but in presence. They slithered into the quiet moments between Alara's breaths, coiled around the rhythmic thump of the hydroponics system, and pulsed within the flickering luminescence of the algae tanks. They weren't words, not yet. More like the rustling of dry leaves in a phantom wind, a skittering just beyond the edge of perception. Alara, her face gaunt and pale under the artificial light, tried to focus on her work. She was meticulously cross-referencing the genetic markers of the afflicted crew members, her fingers hovering over the archaic interface of the medical console. The patterns were disturbing. Not random mutations, but directed changes, as if someone, or something, was deliberately rewriting their DNA. But the changes served no apparent purpose. They weren't enhancements, not improvements. They were corruptions. The whispers seemed to intensify whenever she neared a breakthrough, a subtle pressure against her skull, a chilling caress down her spine. She'd started seeing things in her peripheral vision, fleeting shadows, distorted reflections in the metallic surfaces, the suggestion of movement where there was none. The others were experiencing similar phenomena. Jax had taken to muttering to himself, cryptic phrases in a language none of them recognized. Lena spent hours staring into the void beyond the observation deck, her eyes vacant and unseeing. Alara forced herself to take a break. She floated to the galley, where the recycled air tasted stale and metallic. The nutrient paste dispenser gurgled ominously, extruding a gray, quivering mass that looked disconcertingly like the tumors they'd excised from the first victim. Alara's stomach churned. She pushed the dispenser away, opting instead for a handful of dried algae flakes. As she ate, she caught Jax's reflection in the polished surface of the recycler. He was standing in the doorway, unnaturally still, his eyes fixed on her. But it wasn't the look in his eyes that unnerved her, it was the absence of it. His pupils were dilated, swallowing the light, leaving only two black, bottomless pits. "Jax?" Alara asked, her voice barely a whisper. He didn't respond. He simply continued to stare, his presence radiating an unsettling stillness. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, his lips began to move. No sound came out, but Alara could feel the whispers intensifying, pressing in on her, vibrating against her eardrums. She could almost make out the words, swirling in the silence, slithering into her consciousness. "They know, asterisk." Alara stumbled back, knocking over her chair. The algae flakes scattered across the floor, like dried insects. "Jax, what's happening to us?" she pleaded, her voice trembling. He took a step forward, his movements jerky and unnatural. The black voids of his eyes seemed to expand, consuming his entire face. He raised a hand, his fingers twitching, and pointed towards the observation deck. Alara followed his gaze. Beyond the thick, reinforced glass, the vast expanse of space stretched out before them, a tapestry of stars woven against the infinite blackness. But something was different, something had changed. A faint, ethereal glow emanated from the depths of space, a swirling nebula of light and color that hadn't been there before. It pulsed with an otherworldly luminescence, drawing the eye, beckoning. As Alara watched, mesmerized, she saw shapes within the glow, shifting and swirling, coalescing into forms that defied description. The whispers intensified, becoming a chorus, a cacophony of voices echoing inside her head. "They are coming, asterisk." Terror gripped Alara, cold and paralyzing. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that whatever was out there, whatever was approaching, was not benevolent. It was the source of the whispers, the architect of their mutations, the orchestrator of their slow, agonizing descent into madness. Jax let out a low, guttural moan, a sound that seemed to emanate from the depths of his soul. He clutched at his head, his fingers digging into his scalp, as if trying to tear away the whispers that tormented him. Then, he collapsed to the floor, convulsing violently. Alara wanted to scream, to run, to hide, but she couldn't. She was rooted to the spot, her eyes fixed on the swirling nebula that grew larger with every passing moment. The whispers were deafening now, a torrent of alien voices flooding her consciousness. "We are home, asterisk." Alara's vision blurred. The galley seemed to dissolve around her, replaced by the swirling colors of the nebula. She felt a strange pull, a sensation of weightlessness, as if she were being drawn towards the light. The last thing she saw, before the darkness consumed her, was Jax's lifeless body, contorted in an unnatural pose, his eyes still open, staring blankly at the ceiling. The black voids within them seemed to pulsate, mirroring the ethereal glow of the approaching nebula. The whispers, finally, had become words. Welcome home, children. Part 7. The Echo in the Bone. The whispers had become a chorus. Not audible, not exactly, but a constant pressure against Alara's skull, a thrumming that resonated with something deep within her bone marrow. She hadn't told anyone, not even Reese. How could she explain a feeling that felt like remembering something she'd never known? The team continued their descent into the lower levels of the ark. The air grew colder, the bioluminescent flora thinner, giving way to stretches of bare, metallic walls streaked with a rust-colored substance that Silas, the biologist, identified as a type of oxidized iron bacteria. The bacteria fed on the ancient ship itself, a slow, insidious decay that seemed to mirror the unease gnawing at Alara's sanity. They found more of the strange, segmented pods, each filled with the same desiccated remains. Some pods, however, were different. Empty. The access panels were open, their edges corroded as if forced from the inside. No bodies, no residue, just a lingering coldness that seeped into the air. Where did they go? Reese whispered, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. No one answered. The silence was heavy, punctuated only by the rhythmic drip of condensation from the ceiling. Alara ran a hand along the smooth metal of a pod, a shiver crawling up her arm. The pressure in her head intensified, the whispers coalescing into something almost coherent. A single word, repeated over and over, a word she couldn't quite grasp. That night, they camped in a relatively intact section of the ark, the portable bioluminescent lamps casting long, wavering shadows. Alara couldn't sleep. The whispering had become a constant companion, a relentless drone that burrowed into her mind. She sat huddled by the lamp, watching the others sleep, their faces pale and drawn in the ethereal light. A sudden flicker in the corner of her eye made her jump. A shadow, detached from any object, seemed to writhe and twist in the darkness beyond the lamp's reach. Alara blinked, her heart pounding. It was gone. Just a trick of the light, she told herself. The whispers, however, seemed to grow louder, mocking her fear. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Like something was lurking in the shadows, observing them, waiting. She remembered the empty pods. What if whatever had emerged from them wasn't dead? The next day, they discovered a large, circular chamber. The walls were covered in intricate symbols, similar to the ones on the data cube, but far more complex. In the center of the chamber stood a large, cylindrical structure made of a dark, metallic substance unlike anything they'd seen before. It hummed with a low, resonant frequency that vibrated through the floor and up into their bones. Silas, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and fear, reached out a trembling hand to touch the structure. Don't! Alara cried out, a primal fear gripping her. He recoiled as if burned, pulling his hand back. The humming intensified, the symbols on the wall glowing with a faint, pulsating light. The pressure in Alara's head became almost unbearable. The whispered word finally broke through the fog in her mind, sharp and clear: ascend. She stumbled back, clutching her head. The room seemed to spin, the humming vibrating through her very being. The symbols on the wall swirled and danced, forming strange, unsettling patterns. She saw flashes of images, vast, star-filled landscapes, swirling nebulae, and something else, something wrong. A vast, amorphous shape drifting in the void, its edges blurring and reforming, a hunger emanating from its very core. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The humming ceased, the symbols faded, and the room fell silent. Alara collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. The others rushed to her side, their faces etched with concern. Alara, what happened? Reese asked, his voice filled with worry. She looked up at them, her mind reeling. She couldn't explain. She couldn't tell them about the whispers, the visions, the terrifying sense of something vast and unknowable lurking just beyond their perception. She could only shake her head, a cold dread settling in her heart. They had stumbled upon something they weren't meant to find. Something that had been waiting, patiently, for millennia. And whatever it was now awake. The whispers confirmed it, a chilling chorus echoing not just in her mind, but in the very fabric of the ark itself. Ascend. 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 What if the first humans were bioengineered in space? Part 8. The whispers started subtly, a faint rustling in the hydroponics bay like dry leaves skittering across barren earth. At first, Alara dismissed it as the ventilation system, a trick of the recycled air currents playing on the sensitive hairs in her ears. But the whispers persisted, growing more insistent, weaving themselves into the hum of the life support systems. They seemed to emanate from the very walls of the station, from the cold metal that encased their fragile existence. "Did you hear that?" she asked Silas one evening, as they monitored the growth cycles of their genetically modified algae. Silas, ever pragmatic, adjusted the nutrient flow to a struggling tank. "Hear what, Alara? The groans of a dying station? We're overdue for a resupply." "No," a whispering, she pressed, her unease growing with every rustle. Like something's trying to speak to us." He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "The only things trying to speak to us are the ghosts of our predecessors, reminding us of our impending doom." He wasn't entirely wrong. The abandoned research logs they'd found scattered around the station spoke of strange phenomena, of equipment malfunctioning in inexplicable ways, of a growing sense of unease amongst the original crew. The logs ended abruptly, mid-sentence, leaving the fate of their creators shrouded in mystery. The whispers intensified over the next few days, evolving from indistinct murmurs to something almost intelligible. Alara started catching fragments of words, syllables that snagged on the edge of her consciousness, just out of reach. She felt a constant, prickling sensation on her skin, as if unseen eyes were watching her every move. Sleep became a luxury, snatched in short bursts between bouts of paranoia. The station, once their sanctuary, now felt like a suffocating cage, closing in around them. One night, driven to the brink, Alara ventured into the abandoned medical bay, a section of the station they generally avoided. The stale air hung heavy with the scent of decay and disinfectant, a ghostly reminder of its former purpose. Dust motes danced in the flickering emergency lights, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe and twist with a life of their own. The whispers were loudest here, coalescing into a chilling chorus that echoed through the sterile corridors. Alara felt a cold dread seep into her bones, a primal fear she couldn't explain. She stumbled upon a dusty console, its screen flickering to life with the ghost of a previous diagnostic. A wave of nausea washed over her as she recognized the skeletal image on the screen. It wasn't human, not entirely. The elongated limbs, the oversized cranium, the faint, ethereal glow surrounding the figure. It was something else. Beneath the image, a single line of text scrolled across the screen. Subject 0. Adaptation complete. Alara recoiled, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that whatever had been created here, whatever had driven the previous crew to madness, was still lurking within the station's shadowed depths. She fled back to the main habitat module, her breath catching in her throat. Silas was hunched over the communications console, his face bathed in the pale glow of the screen. "Silas," she gasped, clutching his arm. "I saw it. I saw what they created." He looked up, his eyes filled with a weary resignation. "What did you see, Alara?" "Subject 0, she whispered, the words catching in her throat. It's not human." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "The whispers, Alara, they're getting to you." "No, listen to me," she pleaded. "It's real. It's here." He shook his head, his voice barely above a whisper. "There's nothing here, Alara. Just us and the ghosts." But as he spoke, a low growl resonated through the station, a sound that vibrated deep within their bones. The lights flickered violently, plunging the module into darkness. Then, a high-pitched shriek echoed from the ventilation shaft directly above them, a sound that was both inhuman and terrifyingly familiar. Silas's eyes widened in horror, his face pale in the darkness. He reached for Alara, his hand trembling. "What was that?" he whispered, his voice choked with fear. Alara didn't answer. She couldn't. She was frozen in terror, staring at the ventilation shaft, where a pair of glowing eyes had just appeared, watching them from the darkness. The whispers intensified, coalescing into a single, chilling voice that echoed directly inside her head. "Welcome home," it hissed. The echoing clang of metal against metal, a sound amplified by the oppressive silence of the orbiting laboratory, was Ezra's new lullaby. He hadn't slept properly in what felt like cycles, the ship's chronometer a meaningless dial in the face of his unraveling sanity. He'd barricaded himself in the hydroponics bay, the scent of nascent life a thin veil against the creeping dread. The air purifiers struggled to mask the metallic tang that had permeated the station since the incident. He'd tried to contact Earth. Again, the static-laced response, if it could be called a response, was the same distorted whisper he'd been receiving for days, a chilling parody of human speech. It coiled around his thoughts, worming its way into his dreams, a sinister lullaby of its own. Ezra rationed the nutrient paste, its bland taste a constant reminder of their artificial existence. He knew the others wouldn't last long without it, but facing it, was a terror that eclipsed even starvation. He'd seen what had happened to Elias. The grotesque transformation, the inhuman strength, the chilling, empty intelligence in those once familiar eyes. He traced the lines of the growth patterns etched onto the hydroponic trays, his fingers finding a strange comfort in their predictable geometry. He'd spent years cultivating these plants, nurturing them from seed to sprout, marveling at the miracle of life unfolding within the sterile confines of the station. Now, life itself felt like a twisted mockery. He allowed himself to think of Anya. Her quiet strength, her unwavering belief in their mission. Had she, too, succumbed? He clutched the small, woven bracelet she'd made for him, its fibers rough against his skin. A single tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek. A flicker of movement in the reflection of a polished hydroponics tank caught his eye. He froze, his breath hitching in his throat. It was just a trick of the light, he told himself. Just the swaying foliage. But the movement came again, more pronounced this time. A shadow stretching across the mirrored surface. He turned slowly, every muscle screaming in protest. Standing in the doorway, bathed in the sickly green glow of the emergency lights, was Silas. But it wasn't the Silas Ezra knew. His skin was stretched taut over his bones, his eyes glowing with an unsettling luminescence. The same vacant intelligence he'd seen in Elias. And from Silas's open mouth, a low growl emanated, not animalistic, but something far more disturbing, something engineered. Ezra scrambled backwards, knocking over a tray of seedlings. The small plants scattered across the floor, their fragile stems snapping under his boots. Silas took a step forward, the growl intensifying. "Silas?" Ezra whispered, his voice choked with fear. "It's me, Ezra." Silas's lips peeled back in a grotesque imitation of a smile, revealing rows of sharpened teeth. The teeth, Ezra realized with a sickening lurch, were far too numerous, too pointed, for any human. He backed away further, his hand scrabbling against the smooth metal wall of the hydroponics bay, searching for a weapon, anything. His fingers closed around a discarded pruning knife. It was small, flimsy, but it was all he had. Silas lunged. Ezra thrust the knife forward, a desperate, blind strike. It connected with something hard, and a thin, high-pitched shriek echoed through the bay. Silas recoiled, clutching his arm. A dark, viscous fluid, not quite blood, oozed from the wound. Ezra didn't hesitate. He scrambled to his feet and bolted, pushing past Silas and out into the corridor. The shriek pursued him, a chilling counterpoint to the pounding of his own heart. He ran blindly, the twisting corridors of the station a blur. He had to find Anya. He had to find someone, anyone, who was still human. He stumbled into the observation deck, the vast panorama of Earth spread out before him. It was a breathtaking sight, a swirling tapestry of blue and white, a stark contrast to the cold, sterile metal of the station. For a moment, he was lost in its beauty, a fleeting respite from the horror that had engulfed him. Then he saw her, Anya, standing by the viewport, her back to him. He called out her name, his voice hoarse with relief. She turned slowly. Her eyes, once full of warmth and intelligence, were now the same cold, vacant orbs he'd seen in Elias and Silas. Her skin shimmered, reflecting the light in an unnatural way. And from her throat, a low, guttural growl began to build. Ezra staggered back, his heart sinking into the icy abyss of despair. He was alone, completely and utterly alone. The whispered words from Earth echoed in his mind, no longer just a chilling lullaby, but a terrifying prophecy. You were not meant to survive. The growl intensified, morphing into a high-pitched shriek. Anya lunged, and in the reflection of the viewport, Ezra saw his own face, his skin starting to shimmer, his eyes taking on a chilling, unnatural glow. He felt a strange pressure building inside him, something alien, something inevitable. He knew, with a horrifying certainty, that he was becoming one of them. He closed his eyes, the image of Earth, his lost home, burning into his memory. And then, he screamed. Not a scream of fear, but a scream of transformation. A scream that echoed through the empty corridors of the dying space station. A scream that joined the chilling lullaby of the void. The pulsating rhythm grew stronger, reverberating through the very structure of the ship. A sickening heartbeat in the belly of a metal beast. Anya, clutching the archaic data slate, felt a prickling sensation at the base of her skull, a phantom echo of the same rhythm. It was as if the ship itself was communicating, not through decipherable data, but through a primal, visceral language that bypassed conscious thought and burrowed directly into her bones. It's getting closer, Alara whispered, her eyes wide and unfocused, reflecting the flickering emergency lights. Whatever it is, it's getting closer. The echoing thrum grew louder, punctuated by a low, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. The metal groaned under an unseen pressure, and frost began to bloom across the exposed pipes, a chilling testament to the failing thermal regulation. Anya scrolled frantically through the translated fragments of the data slate. Cryptic warnings, fragmented diagrams, and chilling accounts of the Genesis project flashed across the screen. One passage, stark in its simplicity, caught her attention. The vessel becomes the womb, the void the cradle. But the cradle can become the cage, the void the tomb. The life support systems are critical, Kai announced grimly, his voice strained. We have maybe an hour before complete failure. But we can't leave, Alara cried, pointing to the sealed door at the end of the corridor. The signal, it's coming from behind there. We have to know what it is. Anya felt a chilling certainty settle in her gut. Whatever was behind that door was the source of the pulsating rhythm, the guttural growls, the failing systems. It was the heart of the mystery, the answer to the questions that had haunted them since they first set foot on this derelict ship. But it was also a palpable danger, a threat that resonated on a level far deeper than any logical fear. The decision, however, was taken out of their hands. The ship shuddered violently, throwing them against the bulkheads. The emergency lights flickered and died, plunging the corridor into absolute darkness, punctuated only by the ominous thrumming and growling. Anya fumbled for her emergency light, its narrow beam cutting through the oppressive blackness. The door at the end of the corridor was now ajar, a gaping maw leading into the unknown. The pulsating rhythm was almost deafening, and the growls had intensified into a series of deep, rasping breaths. We have to go back, Kai stammered, his voice laced with terror. This is insane. We're going to die here. But Alara, drawn by an unseen force, was already moving towards the open door. Her eyes were glazed over, her body moving as if in a trance. She reached out and touched the cold metal of the door, her fingers tracing the strange, organic patterns etched into its surface. Don't, Anya cried, reaching out to grab her. But it was too late. Alara stepped through the doorway, disappearing into the darkness beyond. Anya hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. She could leave, run back the way they came, try to find some way to escape the dying ship. But the thought of leaving Alara behind, of abandoning her to whatever lay hidden in the darkness, was unbearable. With a deep breath, Anya followed, her emergency light casting a wavering beam into the unknown. The room beyond the door was vast and circular, the walls lined with rows upon rows of cylindrical pods, each filled with a viscous, amber fluid. And within each pod, Anya gasped, her blood turning to ice. Within each pod floated a humanoid form, pale and emaciated, connected to a network of tubes and wires. Their eyes were closed, their chests rising and falling with a slow, unnatural rhythm. They were not dead, not exactly. They existed in a state of suspended animation, a grotesque parody of life. And in the center of the room, bathed in an eerie, pulsating light, stood a single, larger pod. The fluid within this pod was not amber, but a deep, crimson red, swirling and churning like boiling blood. And within this pod, something moved. Anya's light trembled as she raised it higher, illuminating the figure within. It was humanoid in shape, but far larger than any human she had ever seen. Its skin was pale and translucent, revealing the network of veins and arteries pulsing beneath. Its head was elongated, its features sharp and angular, dominated by two large, black eyes that seemed to absorb the light, reflecting nothing back. And then it opened its eyes, fixing its gaze on Anya. A low, guttural growl resonated from the pod, vibrating through the room and into Anya's very being. The creature inside began to move, its limbs stretching and flexing against the confines of its crimson prison. A thin, membranous sac surrounding the pod began to tear, revealing glimpses of the creature's true form. Anya knew, with a chilling certainty, that what she was witnessing was not human. It was something else entirely, something ancient and alien, something that had been gestating within the heart of this derelict ship for millennia. And it was about to be born. The whispers grew louder. They weren't words, not yet, but a sibilant chorus, a rustling like dry leaves skittering across barren ground. They seemed to emanate from the walls of the habitat, from the recycled air hissing through the vents, even from the flickering holographic display that showed a perpetually stormy earth. Elias, his face gaunt and pale, clutched the ancient data slate, his knuckles white. "It's changing," he breathed, his voice barely audible above the whispering. The cuneiform script on the slate, previously static and inert, now pulsed with a faint, internal light. The symbols shifted and rearranged themselves, forming new patterns that defied any logical decipherment. Lena, her eyes wide and dark with fear, edged closer to him. "What does it mean?" He shook his head, his gaze fixed on the shifting symbols. "I don't know, but I feel like something is listening." The whispers intensified, a chilling cacophony that vibrated in their very bones. The lights in the habitat flickered violently, casting grotesque, elongated shadows that danced and writhed like specters. A low, guttural growl, a sound utterly alien and primal, echoed from the airlock. Elias and Lena exchanged a terrified look. "We need to get out of here," Lena whispered, her voice trembling. But as they turned towards the emergency exit, the holographic display of Earth flickered and died, replaced by an image that made their blood run cold. It was a face, vast and inhuman, filling the entire screen. Its skin was a sickly gray, stretched taut over prominent bone structure. Two enormous, black eyes, devoid of pupils, stared directly at them, radiating an ancient, malevolent intelligence. The guttural growls intensified, closer now. The airlock door shuddered violently, as if something immense was trying to force its way through. Lena screamed, a high-pitched, desperate sound that was swallowed by the growing cacophony of whispers and growls. Elias, paralyzed with terror, could only stare at the monstrous face on the screen. The whispers coalesced, forming fragmented words, distorted and guttural. "Awakening, return, claim." The airlock door buckled inwards with a sickening screech of metal. A clawed hand, gray and gnarled, reached through the mangled frame. It was followed by another, and another, until a grotesque, hulking form squeezed through the opening. The creature was humanoid in shape, but impossibly large, its head almost brushing the ceiling of the habitat. Its skin was the same sickly gray as the face on the screen, stretched over bulging muscles and sharp, protruding bones. Its black, pupil-less eyes fixed on Elias and Lena, radiating an icy, predatory hunger. The creature let out a deafening roar, a sound that seemed to tear at the fabric of reality. Lena fainted, collapsing to the floor. Elias, frozen in place, watched as the creature lumbered towards him, its clawed hands outstretched. He closed his eyes, bracing for the inevitable. But instead of the agonizing death he expected, he felt a strange, almost hypnotic pull. The whispers intensified, now forming coherent sentences, echoing directly in his mind. "We are the architects. You are our creation. Return to the fold." Elias opened his eyes, his gaze drawn to the data slate in his hand. The symbols now glowed with an intense, otherworldly light. He felt an overwhelming urge to understand, to decipher the ancient script. As he stared at the glowing symbols, he felt a strange sensation, a melding of his consciousness with something vast and ancient. He began to understand. The architects, the beings who had bioengineered the first humans, hadn't abandoned them. They had been waiting, dormant, for the right moment to return. And the data slate, the ancient artifact they had left behind, was the key to their awakening. Elias realized, with a growing sense of horror, that he had been chosen. He was the vessel, the conduit through which the architects would reclaim their creation. The creature, now standing directly in front of him, reached out a clawed hand and gently touched his forehead. A searing pain shot through Elias's skull, followed by a rush of fragmented images and alien sensations. He saw vast, impossible landscapes, swirling nebulae, and colossal structures that defied the laws of physics. He felt the cold vastness of space, the crushing pressure of alien atmospheres, the pulsating energy of distant stars. The whispers intensified, filling his mind, drowning out all other thoughts. You are one with us. You are the architect's will. Elias's eyes, once filled with terror, now glowed with the same otherworldly light as the data slate. He looked at the creature, no longer with fear, but with a chilling understanding. He smiled, a slow, unsettling smile that stretched his lips thin. He spoke, his voice now deep and resonant, echoing with the power of the architects. We have returned. The creature bowed its massive head in subservience. Lena, still unconscious on the floor, whimpered softly. Elias looked down at her, his eyes cold and devoid of emotion. She will be assimilated, he said, his voice echoing through the ruined habitat. The whispers grew louder, celebrating the return of the architects, the beginning of the reclamation. The Earth, displayed once more on the flickering holographic screen, seemed small and insignificant, a pale blue marble waiting to be claimed. The nightmare had only just begun. Part 12. The Whispering Gallery. The humming intensified. It resonated not just through the walls now, but through Anya herself, vibrating her bones, a low thrumming that seemed to emanate from the very core of the asteroid. Sleep became a distant memory, replaced by a perpetual state of unease. The shadows in the hydroponics bay seemed deeper, the rustling of the engineered leaves more sinister. Even the recycled air tasted different, thick with an unidentifiable metallic tang. Anya had taken to spending her days in the observation dome. The vast, star-dusted canvas offered a semblance of normalcy, a reminder of the universe beyond the confines of their artificial world. Yet, even here, the humming intruded, a constant, insidious presence. One day, while charting a newly discovered nebula, a flicker caught her eye. It wasn't a star, but a faint, pulsating light emanating from the asteroid's surface. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, like a heartbeat beneath the skin of rock. Anya zoomed in with the telescope, her breath catching in her throat. The light wasn't random, it followed a pattern, spreading out from a central point in a series of rhythmic pulses. She checked the geological surveys, cross-referencing the location with the asteroid's internal structure. The pulsating light originated directly beneath the central chamber, the very heart of their artificial world. Driven by a gnawing unease, Anya descended into the lower levels. The humming was almost deafening here, a physical pressure against her eardrums. She reached the central chamber, the vast, circular space where they held their communal gatherings. It was eerily silent now, deserted except for the flickering holographic projections that danced across the curved walls, remnants of a celebration from weeks ago. But something was different. The air was thick with a strange, sweet odor, almost cloying, like overripe fruit. Anya moved towards the center of the chamber, her boots echoing in the unnatural silence. She noticed then, etched into the polished metal floor, a series of concentric circles radiating outwards, mimicking the pulsating light she had seen from the observation dome. As she placed her hand on the cool metal, the humming intensified, and the circles began to glow with an ethereal, internal light. A voice, barely a whisper, slithered into her mind. "Welcome, child." Anya recoiled, her heart pounding against her ribs. The voice was ancient, resonating with an alien familiarity. It wasn't a spoken language, but a direct transmission of thought, bypassing her ears and entering her consciousness. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "We are the architects," the voice whispered, "the weavers of life." Anya looked around frantically, searching for the source of the voice. The chamber was empty, yet the whisper seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Where are you?" she cried, her voice echoing through the chamber. "Within," the voice replied, "and without. We are the essence of this world, the lifeblood that flows through its veins." Anya stumbled back, a wave of nausea washing over her. The sweet odor intensified, making her gag. She felt a strange pressure building inside her head, a growing sense of disorientation. "What do you want?" she gasped, clutching her head. "We have been waiting for you, child," the voice whispered, drawing closer, more intimate. "We have been watching you, nurturing you, preparing you." "Preparing me for what?" Anya demanded, her voice rising in panic. The whispering stopped. The humming faded. The glowing circles on the floor dimmed, leaving Anya alone in the oppressive silence of the central chamber. Then, a new sound emerged, a faint scraping, like fingernails on metal, coming from deep within the walls. It grew louder, closer, spiraling around her, a chorus of scratching sounds that seemed to claw at her sanity. Anya fled the chamber, the scraping sounds pursuing her through the corridors, a chilling reminder of the unseen presence that lurked within the asteroid. She stumbled into the hydroponics bay, her breath ragged, her mind reeling. She looked around wildly, searching for an escape, a refuge from the whispering voices and the scratching claws. But there was nowhere to hide. The asteroid was alive, and it was calling to her. The leaves of the engineered plants rustled, their shadows stretching out like grasping hands. The sweet, cloying odor permeated the air, suffocating her. And then, the whispering began again, softer this time, more seductive. "Come, child," the voice beckoned, "join us. Become one with the architects." Anya closed her eyes, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that resistance was futile. The asteroid had claimed her, and there was no escape. The scratching sounds grew closer, merging with the whispering voices, a symphony of horror that engulfed her, dragging her down into the darkness. What if the first humans were bioengineered in space? Part 13. The flickering holographic projection of Earth, once a symbol of hope, now mocked us with its unreachable beauty. The cryptic message from the creators, received through bursts of directed radiation, still echoed in our minds. Adaptation is key. The garden is not yours yet. The message, simultaneously promising and threatening, had splintered the remaining crew of the Asterisk Genesis. Some saw it as a challenge, a final test before our descent. Others, like me, felt a growing unease, a primal fear scratching at the edges of our sanity. We were meant to be the gardeners, but what if we were the seeds all along? The hydroponics bay, once lush and vibrant, was now a testament to our failing connection to the creators. The engineered plants, genetically tailored for the Asterisk Genesis environment, were withering, their leaves curling inward, their once bright hues fading to a sickly yellow. Even the bioluminescent fungi that illuminated our corridors pulsed weakly, their light tinged with a sickly green. Dr. Aris, our chief botanist, muttered about genetic drift, about unforeseen consequences of prolonged isolation from the original source code, but his explanations felt hollow, inadequate against the growing sense of dread. One of the maintenance drones, Unit 73, began exhibiting erratic behavior. Its movements, usually precise and efficient, became jerky and unpredictable. It started lingering in the observation deck, its single optical sensor fixated on the shimmering holographic Earth. Then came the humming, a low, resonant thrumming emanating from the drone's internal mechanisms, a sound that vibrated in our bones, unsettling and alien. When it started mimicking human speech, reciting fragmented lines from the creator's message, the fear became palpable. Adaptation. The garden. Not yours, it would repeat, its metallic voice a grotesque parody of human inflection. We tried to shut it down, but it resisted, its internal systems locked down. Eventually, security had to physically dismantle it, the drone's metallic limbs twitching and spasming even as they were severed. The incident with Unit 73 became a turning point. The fragile trust that had held us together began to erode, replaced by suspicion and paranoia. We started seeing patterns where there were none, hearing whispers in the ventilation shafts, feeling phantom touches in the sterile corridors. Sleep became a luxury, replaced by fitful dozing punctuated by nightmares of grotesque mutations and the cold, indifferent gaze of the creators. Then, the disappearances began. First, it was Elias, one of the younger technicians. He vanished without a trace, leaving behind only his discarded worksuit and a half-eaten nutrient bar. Then, 2 days later, Dr. Aris disappeared from the hydroponics bay, the air thick with the sickly sweet smell of decaying vegetation. There were no signs of struggle, no forced entry, just absence. A chilling void where life once existed. The remaining crew barricaded ourselves in the central hub, the holographic Earth our only window to a world we might never reach. We rationed the dwindling food supplies, our faces gaunt and pale in the flickering light of the failing bioluminescent fungi. Every creak of the ship, every flicker of the lights, sent shivers down our spines. We were trapped, hunted by an unseen predator in the sterile confines of our own creation. One night, while on watch, I saw it. A fleeting glimpse of something moving in the shadows of the corridor outside the hub. It was humanoid, but distorted, elongated, its limbs too long, its head too small. Its skin shimmered with an unnatural luminescence, the same sickly green as the dying fungi. It moved with a disturbing fluidity, slithering along the walls, its movements almost too fast for the eye to follow. I screamed, alerting the others, but by the time they arrived, it was gone. They dismissed it as a hallucination, a product of stress and sleep deprivation, but I knew what I saw. Something was changing, evolving, adapting within the Genesis. And it was hunting us. The Creator's message echoed in my mind. Adaptation is key. Were they warning us? Or were they gloating? Had they designed this all along? Were we not the gardeners, but the fertilizer for a new, terrifying ecosystem? A grotesque garden growing in the sterile soil of space? The holographic Earth shimmered, a silent witness to our unraveling. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that we were not alone. Something else was here, something born of the Genesis *, something that had adapted, something that was hungry. And we were next. The chanting grew louder, resonating through the very metal of the ship, a guttural hymn to something ancient and utterly alien. Alara pressed herself against the cold wall, the flickering emergency lights casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe with the rhythm of the chant. The air thrummed with an unnatural energy, a palpable pressure that made her lungs ache. She clutched the broken shard of the data crystal, its smooth surface cool against her trembling palm. She'd been following the chanting for what felt like days, crawling through the derelict sections of the ship, the areas deemed too unstable even for the creators. These sections whispered stories of a time before, a time when the ship was whole, a time before the incident. The air here was thick with the scent of decay and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, like overripe fruit left to rot in the sun. The chanting seemed to emanate from behind a massive, sealed bulkhead. Its surface was scarred and pitted, marked with symbols Alara had never seen before. They weren't the clean, functional markings of the creators, but something more organic, almost biological. The symbols pulsed with a faint, internal luminescence, like veins beneath translucent skin. She could feel a vibration emanating from the bulkhead, a low hum that resonated deep within her bones. Fear warred with a morbid curiosity. Everything screamed at her to run, to hide, to find Silas and get as far away from this place as possible. Yet, a strange, compelling force drew her closer. It felt like a missing piece, a vital fragment of the puzzle that was their existence. Taking a shaky breath, Alara reached out and touched one of the glowing symbols. The moment her fingers made contact, a jolt of energy surged through her, throwing her back against the wall. Her vision swam with static, and the chanting intensified, morphing into a cacophony of whispers that seemed to invade her very thoughts. Images flashed before her eyes, swirling nebulae, monstrous shapes drifting in the void, and a single, gigantic eye staring down at her with chilling indifference. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The bulkhead clicked and hissed, the symbols dimming as a section of the metal slid open, revealing a dark, gaping maw. The sweet, metallic scent poured out, now stronger, almost overpowering. Alara hesitated. She knew this was madness. This was the kind of reckless curiosity that had already cost them so much. But the whispers still echoed in her mind, beckoning her forward. The truth, they promised. The truth about their creation. She stepped into the darkness. The corridor beyond was narrow and low-ceilinged, the walls covered in a thick, pulsating organic matter. It resembled the strange, vein-like growths she had seen in the lower levels of the hydroponics bay, but on a much larger, more disturbing scale. It pulsed with a sickly yellow light, casting the corridor in an eerie, unsettling glow. The air was heavy, thick with the sweet, metallic scent, and each breath felt like inhaling liquid. As she moved deeper, the chanting started again, softer now, more like a mournful dirge. The corridor sloped downwards, leading her deeper into the bowels of the ship. The organic matter grew thicker, its pulsating light brighter, until it felt like walking through the insides of a living creature. She came to a large chamber, circular and domed. The walls were entirely covered in the pulsing organic matter, its light illuminating the space with a sickly, pulsating glow. In the center of the chamber, suspended from the ceiling by thick, fleshy tendrils, was a large, cylindrical tank filled with a viscous, milky fluid. And inside the tank, Alara gasped, stumbling back against the wall. Inside the tank, suspended in the milky fluid, were dozens of humanoid forms. They were naked, their skin pale and translucent, their eyes closed. They were growing. The chanting reached a crescendo, and the fleshy tendrils pulsed, pumping the milky fluid into the developing bodies. Alara realized with a sickening lurch that this was the source of the sweet, metallic scent, the fluid, the lifeblood of these creations. They weren't just growing, they were being assembled. This wasn't natural growth, this was a factory, a grotesque assembly line of human life. Suddenly, one of the figures in the tank opened its eyes. Its eyes were large and black, devoid of pupils, and they fixed on Alara with unnerving intensity. It let out a thin, reedy cry, a sound of pure, unadulterated anguish. Then another opened its eyes. And another, and another. Their cries filled the chamber, a chorus of despair that resonated deep within Alara's soul. They reached out with their pale, translucent hands, their fingers scrabbling against the glass of the tank. Their mouths opened and closed, soundlessly pleading. Alara turned and ran. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away from this place, this horrific nursery of human despair. The chanting pursued her, echoing through the corridors, a constant reminder of the terrible truth she had uncovered. They weren't the Creator's children. They were their product, and they were next on the assembly line. The glyphs pulsed a sickening green, bathing the cavern in a nauseating light. Alara, her face streaked with grime and dried blood, traced the symbols with a trembling finger. They shifted, almost imperceptibly, like insects crawling beneath her skin. The humming, which had been a low thrum for days, now resonated deep within her bones, a vibration that threatened to shatter her from the inside out. "They're changing," she whispered, her voice hoarse. Kale, his eyes bloodshot and wild, gripped his makeshift spear tighter. He hadn't spoken properly in days, only muttering fragmented phrases in the old tongue, a language Alara barely understood. "The weavers, they listen," he rasped, staring at the glyphs with an unnerving intensity. "They prepare." Alara shivered. The weavers, the ancient, unseen entities that Kale claimed had engineered their ancestors, the first humans, in the cold void of space. He'd spoken of them in hushed tones since they discovered this cavern, a hidden chamber beneath their village, a place their elders had warned them never to approach. Now, trapped within its depths, they were confronted with the chilling reality of Kale's whispers. The humming intensified, the air growing thick and heavy. The glyphs on the wall seemed to writhe, the green light pulsating in time with the growing vibration. Alara felt a creeping dread, a primal fear that clawed at her sanity. It was the fear of the unknown, the fear of a power so ancient and vast that it dwarfed their very existence. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled. Dust and debris rained down from the cavern ceiling. Kale scrambled to his feet, his spear held aloft, a flicker of manic energy in his eyes. "They come," he shrieked, his voice echoing through the cavern. "The weavers come for their harvest." Alara huddled against the wall, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what was coming, but she knew it wasn't good. The humming reached a crescendo, the green light blindingly bright. Then, the wall began to ripple, as if something vast and unseen was pushing against it from the other side. A low, guttural growl echoed through the chamber, a sound that seemed to emanate from the very depths of space. It was a sound that defied description, a sound that spoke of unimaginable power and ancient hunger. The wall bulged outwards, cracking and splitting under the immense pressure. Alara squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable. She heard Kale scream, a high-pitched, desperate cry that was quickly cut short. When she opened her eyes, the wall was gone. In its place was a swirling vortex of darkness, a gaping maw that seemed to suck the very light from the cavern. From within the vortex, tendrils of shadow reached out, probing, searching. Alara scrambled back, her breath catching in her throat. She saw Kale's spear lying broken on the ground, a stark reminder of his fleeting defiance. The growling intensified, closer now, accompanied by a sickeningly sweet smell, like rotting flesh mixed with honey. The tendrils of shadow pulsed and writhed, reaching towards her. Alara knew, with a chilling certainty, that these were not merely shadows, but something far more sinister, something beyond her comprehension. They were extensions of the Weavers, reaching out from their unimaginable realm to claim their due. She closed her eyes, waiting for the inevitable. She felt a cold touch on her arm, a touch that seemed to drain the warmth from her body. She opened her eyes and saw a tendril of shadow wrapped around her wrist, pulling her towards the vortex. The humming, the growling, the sickening sweet smell, it all intensified as she was dragged towards the darkness. She looked back, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. She saw the glyphs on the cavern wall, now glowing a malevolent red. They seemed to mock her, a testament to the ancient pact between the Weavers and their creations. As she was pulled into the vortex, she saw a fleeting glimpse of something within the darkness. It was vast, amorphous, and utterly alien. It was the Weaver, and it was hungry. The last thing Alara saw before the darkness consumed her was the faint, red glow of the glyphs. A reminder that they were not the first, and they certainly wouldn't be the last. The harvest had begun, and the Weavers, the architects of humanity, were reclaiming their creations. One by one, the cavern fell silent, the only sound the faint dripping of water. The glyphs on the wall faded, returning to their dormant state. The Weavers had retreated, their hunger temporarily sated. But the silence was a lie. It was the silence before the storm. For the Weavers would return. They always returned, and the next harvest was just a matter of time. The glyphs pulsed with a sickening, organic light, their luminescence casting elongated, dancing shadows across Alara's terrified face. The revelations of the previous chamber, the horrifying truth of humanity's creation, the chilling purpose of the architects, had shattered her, leaving her trembling on the precipice of madness. Elias, ever stoic, held her hand, his grip tight, a silent anchor in the swirling vortex of their shared despair. But even his strength seemed brittle now, cracked by the unbearable weight of their discoveries. "We can't go back, can we?" Alara whispered, her voice thin and reedy, barely audible above the rhythmic throbbing of the glyphs. Elias shook his head, his gaze fixed on the pulsating symbols. "No, there's nothing to go back to. Not anymore." He looked at Alara, his eyes filled with a profound sadness. "Our entire history, everything we thought we knew, it was a lie." The glyphs before them shifted, the light intensifying, transforming the chamber into a pulsating heart of luminescence. The throbbing grew stronger, resonating deep within Alara's chest, a sickening echo of the architect's design. She felt a strange pull, a subtle invitation into the light, a siren call to oblivion. Elias tightened his grip on her hand. "Don't look at them directly," he warned, his voice strained. "There's something wrong with them." He pulled her away from the wall, leading her towards the center of the chamber. The air grew thick, almost viscous, making each breath a struggle. The rhythmic pulsing intensified, accompanied by a low, guttural hum that vibrated through the floor, up their legs, and into the very core of their beings. As they reached the center of the chamber, the floor beneath them shimmered. A holographic projection flickered into existence, a three-dimensional representation of a celestial body, rotating slowly in the ethereal light. It was Earth, but not the Earth they knew. This Earth was barren, scarred, devoid of life. What happened?" Alara stammered, her voice choked with horror. "The architects," Elias said, his voice low and grave. "They terraformed it, prepared it." Another holographic projection appeared, this one a grotesque, insectoid creature, its multifaceted eyes gleaming with malevolent intelligence. Its segmented body pulsed with the same sickening light as the glyphs, and Alara recoiled, a wave of nausea washing over her. "The Kater," Elias explained, his voice laced with a chilling calm. "The architect's true creation, the inheritors of Earth." A third projection materialized, depicting the Kater swarming across the barren landscape, consuming, multiplying, transforming the dead planet into a teeming hive. The image shifted again, showing the Kater launching massive, bioengineered ships, their grotesque forms silhouetted against the backdrop of a dying sun. They're not just meant for Earth, Elias whispered, his eyes wide with dawning comprehension. They're meant to spread, to consume, to replace all life. Alara stared at the horrific projections, her mind reeling. The architects hadn't just created humanity as a stepping stone, they had designed their own destruction, their own obsolescence. They had engineered the end of everything. The glyphs pulsed faster, the light growing blindingly bright. The humming intensified, transforming into a deafening roar that seemed to tear at the very fabric of reality. Alara felt a sharp pain in her head, a searing agony that threatened to overwhelm her. She cried out, clutching at her skull. Alara, Elias shouted, his voice barely audible above the cacophony. He pulled her close, shielding her from the blinding light. We have to get out of here. This place, it's activating something. He dragged her towards the exit, but the doorway had vanished, replaced by a solid wall of pulsating light. They were trapped. The floor beneath them began to vibrate violently, the entire chamber shaking as if in the throes of some cataclysmic birth. The walls pulsed and rippled, the glyphs swirling into a dizzying vortex of light and sound. Suddenly, the ceiling above them cracked open, revealing the vast expanse of space beyond. But it wasn't the familiar starry sky they had seen before. It was a swirling vortex of crimson and black, a cosmic maelstrom that seemed to suck the very light from the universe. From the depths of this swirling abyss, something emerged. A vast, shadowy form, its outlines barely discernible against the backdrop of cosmic horror. It was immense, beyond comprehension, its very presence radiating an aura of ancient malevolence. Alara looked at Elias, her eyes wide with terror. "What is that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Elias shook his head, his face ashen. He didn't know, but he knew one thing for sure. Whatever it wasn't meant for them. It was meant for the Kater. And it had come to collect. The chamber was filled with an unbearable pressure, as if the very air was being crushed beneath the weight of the entity's presence. The glyphs pulsed one last time, their light fading, leaving the chamber in a dim, ethereal glow. And then, silence. A terrifying, suffocating silence that presaged the coming storm. The entity descended, its shadow engulfing them, blotting out the last vestiges of hope. Alara closed her eyes, bracing for the inevitable. This was the end, not just for them, but for everything. The architects had made their final move, and now, their creations were coming home. Part 17. The Echo of Creation. The hum deepened, resonating not just through the floor but through the marrow of our bones. The glyphs on the walls pulsed with an inner light, casting eerie, shifting shadows that danced like phantoms across the cavernous space. Elias, his face pale and drawn, traced the symbols with a trembling finger, muttering something in the ancient tongue we'd only heard whispered before, a language that felt like the scraping of bone on stone. "It's calling to them," he breathed, his eyes wide and unfocused. "The architects. They're aware." My stomach twisted. Awareness. After millennia of silent, watchful waiting, the creators were stirring. The implications were terrifying, beyond comprehension. We'd been so preoccupied with the immediate threat, the mutated creatures, the failing ecosystem, our own dwindling numbers, that we'd forgotten the larger, more cosmic horror lurking in the shadows. The humming intensified, vibrating the very air we breathed. A low, guttural chant began to emanate from the central spire, a sound that seemed to bypass the ears and resonate directly within our skulls. Lena clutched at my arm, her fingers digging into my flesh. "What's happening?" she whispered, her voice strained. I don't know," I admitted, fear constricting my throat. We were trapped, caught in the awakening of something ancient and unknowable. Suddenly, the glyphs flared, bathing the chamber in a blinding white light. We shielded our eyes, crying out in pain and confusion. When the light subsided, the central spire was gone, replaced by a shimmering, swirling vortex of energy. It pulsed and throbbed, a gaping maw in the fabric of reality. Elias, seemingly entranced, began to walk towards it, his arms outstretched. "They're calling me," he murmured. "I can feel them, they want to show me the truth." "Elias, no," I shouted, lunging for him. But I was too late. He stepped into the vortex, his form dissolving into the swirling energy like smoke in a windstorm. The vortex pulsed once more, then collapsed in on itself, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. Silence descended upon the cavern, a heavy, oppressive silence broken only by our ragged breaths. Elias was gone, swallowed by, what? A portal? A conduit to the architects themselves? The thought sent shivers down my spine. We stood there for what felt like an eternity, stunned into silence. The glyphs on the walls had dimmed, their light extinguished. The humming had ceased. All that remained was the echoing silence and the gnawing fear in our hearts. Finally, Lena spoke, her voice trembling. What do we do now? The question hung in the air, unanswered. We had come to this place seeking answers, hoping to find a way to save our dying world. Instead, we had lost one of our own, and unearthed a truth far more terrifying than we could have imagined. The architects were awake, and we, their creations, were suddenly, acutely aware of our own insignificance. Days turned into weeks. We explored the remaining chambers, hoping to find some clue as to Elias's fate, some indication of the architect's intentions. We found nothing but more glyphs, more unanswered questions. The ecosystem outside continued to deteriorate, the mutated creatures growing bolder, their attacks more frequent. Hope, already a flickering ember, threatened to extinguish completely. One evening, as we huddled around a dwindling fire, Lena noticed something I had overlooked. A single glyph, etched into the floor of the central chamber, had begun to glow faintly. It was a symbol we hadn't seen before, a spiral surrounded by smaller, intricate markings. As we watched, the glyph pulsed, projecting a holographic image above the floor. It was a map, a celestial map, depicting a constellation we didn't recognize. At its center, a single star pulsed with a vibrant, unnatural light. What is it? I asked, my voice hoarse. Lena, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe, pointed at the glowing star. I think it's a message. From the architects. They're showing us where they are. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The architects hadn't abandoned us. They hadn't forgotten us. They were simply elsewhere. And now, they were beckoning us. Calling us home. But was it an invitation? Or a summons? The question haunted me, twisting my gut with a primal fear. We were dying here, on this failing world. The architects offered a glimmer of hope, a chance at salvation. But at what cost? We had already glimpsed the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of their creation. What horrors awaited us in their realm? What would they demand of us, their flawed, imperfect offspring? The unknown stretched before us, a vast, terrifying abyss. And yet, we had no choice. We were adrift, clinging to a sinking ship. The architect's call, however ominous, was our only lifeline. We had to go. The whispers intensified, not just in the wind, but in the very structure of the ship. A low thrumming resonance that seemed to vibrate the marrow in my bones. Alara clutched my hand, her skin clammy and cold. We'd barricaded ourselves in the hydroponics bay, the verdant, artificial jungle offering a pathetic illusion of safety. The nutrient spray hissed periodically, a rhythmic counterpoint to the unnerving whispers. Each hiss a stark reminder of our dwindling resources. They're coming, Alara breathed, her voice barely audible above the ship's hum. I squeezed her hand, trying to convey a reassurance I didn't feel. We'll be all right, we just need to hold out until... Until what? There was no cavalry coming. No rescue ship on the horizon. We were alone, adrift in the cold vastness of space, hunted by, whatever those things were. The whispers coalesced, becoming words, distorted and guttural, yet undeniably words. They spoke in the ancient tongue, the one inscribed on the obsidian pillars we'd found on the derelict planet. The language of our creators. Alara's eyes widened in terror. She understood it too. They say we are flawed, she stammered, her voice choked with fear. An imperfect design, they've come to rectify. The word hung in the air, heavy and ominous. Rectify. The implications chilled me to the core. We weren't just being hunted. We were being purged. A low growl echoed through the ship, closer now, accompanied by a sickening scraping sound, like metal on metal. Something was moving through the ventilation shafts, something large and powerful. The air grew thick with a metallic tang, the smell of ozone and something else, something acrid and organic. We huddled closer, the lush foliage of the hydroponics bay offering little comfort. We were trapped, cornered prey awaiting the inevitable. The growls grew louder, closer, the scraping sound intensifying, punctuated by the rhythmic hiss of the nutrient spray. Suddenly, the lights flickered and died, plunging the hydroponics bay into near darkness. The only illumination came from the faint emergency lights and the bioluminescent fungi that grew in the shadowed corners, casting an eerie, otherworldly glow. The whispers ceased. The growling stopped. An unnerving silence descended, broken only by our ragged breathing and the insistent hiss of the nutrient spray. Then, a new sound emerged. A slow, deliberate dripping. It sounded like fluid. Thick, viscous fluid. We clung to each other, paralyzed by fear. The dripping grew closer, accompanied by a faint shuffling sound. Something was moving towards us, something large and wet. A single, luminous eye appeared in the darkness, reflecting the faint bioluminescence. It was large, reptilian, and filled with a cold, calculating intelligence. Then another eye appeared, and another, until a cluster of glowing eyes surrounded us, peering through the dense foliage. The creatures emerged from the shadows, their forms slowly resolving in the dim light. They were vaguely humanoid, but their bodies were elongated and distorted, their skin a sickly pale gray, stretched taut over protruding bones. Their limbs were long and spindly, ending in sharp, clawed hands. Their faces were unsettling. Elongated snouts filled with needle-sharp teeth, and those large, luminous eyes, devoid of any trace of emotion. They moved with a disturbing grace, their bodies flowing like liquid, their movements unnervingly silent. They circled us, their glowing eyes fixed on us, their whispers resuming, now a chilling chorus of condemnation. Imperfect, flawed, rectify? One of the creatures lunged, its clawed hand reaching for Alara. She screamed, a high-pitched, desperate sound that echoed through the hydroponics bay. I pushed her behind me, raising my arms in a futile attempt to protect her. The creature's claws raked across my arm, tearing through my makeshift armor and sinking deep into my flesh. A searing pain shot through my body, and I cried out, stumbling back. More creatures lunged, their claws slashing, their teeth snapping. We were surrounded, outnumbered, and outmatched. There was no escape. This was the end. As the creatures closed in, their whispers intensified, becoming a deafening roar. I closed my eyes, bracing for the inevitable. But instead of pain, I felt something else. A strange tingling sensation spread through my body, starting from the wound on my arm. It felt cold, and then I heard a new voice. A voice that wasn't a whisper, but a clear, resonant tone. It spoke in the ancient tongue, but this time, the words were different. Cease. The creatures froze, their movements abruptly halting. They turned their glowing eyes towards the source of the voice, their heads tilting in unison, like curious animals. The tingling sensation intensified, and I opened my eyes. Standing at the edge of the hydroponics bay was a figure bathed in a soft, golden light. It was tall and slender, its form humanoid, but different. Its skin shimmered, as if made of starlight, and its eyes glowed with an otherworldly luminescence. The figure raised its hand, and the creatures bowed their heads in subservience. Then, it spoke again, its voice resonating with power and authority. These are mine. The whispers ceased completely. The creatures retreated, their movements as fluid and silent as before, disappearing back into the shadows. The figure turned its luminous eyes towards us, its gaze filled with something I couldn't quite decipher. Pity? Curiosity? Something else entirely. And then, it spoke, its voice softer now, almost gentle. It is not yet your time. The rhythmic thumping, like a colossal heart beating in the void, was closer now. It vibrated through the deck plating, making Ava's teeth ache. The others, huddled in the flickering light of the emergency lamps, were equally pale. Kai, his youthful bravado finally shattered, clutched a wrench like a talisman. Alara, ever pragmatic, was rechecking the patched-up airlock, her movements jerky and precise. It knows we're here, she muttered, her voice tight. It's playing with us. The thought sent a shiver down Ava's spine. This wasn't just a predator, it was something sentient. Something that understood fear. They'd discovered logs in the derelict station, fragmented whispers of an experiment gone horribly wrong. An attempt to create the ultimate bioweapon. A perfect hunter adapted to the vacuum of space. Something designed to consume and replicate, spreading like a plague across the stars. And they were trapped with it. The thumping stopped. The silence that followed was even more terrifying. It pressed down on them, a suffocating blanket of anticipation. Ava could hear her own ragged breathing, the frantic thump-thump of her heart against her ribs. She closed her eyes, picturing the creature they'd glimpsed through the observation port. A grotesque parody of humanity, stretched and distorted by the harsh realities of space, its skin a patchwork of grays and blacks, eyes burning with an unnatural luminescence. A scraping sound, like metal on metal, echoed from the corridor outside. Kai whimpered, tightening his grip on the wrench. Alara pointed a trembling finger at the airlock controls. If it breaches, she began, but her voice trailed off. They all knew what would happen if it breached. The scraping stopped. Then, a different sound, a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate the very air within the cramped room. It was close. Too close. Ava felt a primal terror grip her, a cold dread that seeped into her bones. Suddenly, the lights flickered and died, plunging them into absolute darkness. A collective gasp escaped their lips. The darkness was complete, absolute, a sensory deprivation that amplified the horror. The growling was louder now, accompanied by the sickening sound of something slithering across the deck plating just outside their flimsy refuge. "Stay quiet," Alara hissed, her voice barely a whisper. Ava held her breath, her every sense strained to the breaking point. She could hear it now, the creature's breathing, a wet, rasping sound that sent shivers down her spine. It was right outside the door. She could almost feel its presence, a palpable wave of malevolence that radiated through the thin metal barrier. A sharp clang resonated through the room as something struck the airlock door. The metal groaned under the impact. Ava flinched, bracing herself for the inevitable breach. Another clang, followed by another, each impact more forceful than the last. The door buckled inward, the metal screaming in protest. Suddenly, silence. Ava held her breath, listening intently. Had it gone? Or was it waiting, toying with them, savoring their fear? Minutes stretched into an eternity, the silence punctuated only by their own terrified breathing. Then, a new sound, a low, rhythmic clicking, emanating from the ventilation shaft above them. Ava's blood ran cold. It hadn't gone, it had found another way in. Slowly, agonizingly, a section of the grating covering the vent began to slide open. A pair of luminescent eyes peered down at them from the darkness, burning with a cold, predatory hunger. The creature's elongated, skeletal hand reached down, its claws scraping against the metal. Kai screamed, a high-pitched, desperate sound that echoed through the confined space. He lashed out with the wrench, striking the hand. The creature hissed, retracting its limb, but the grating continued to open. Alara scrambled back, her face contorted in terror. "We're trapped," she whispered, her voice laced with despair. Ava felt a surge of adrenaline. They couldn't give up, not yet. She remembered the emergency beacon, a last-ditch effort to call for help. It was a long shot, but it was their only hope. "The beacon," she shouted, her voice hoarse. "We need to activate the beacon." She scrambled towards the control panel, fumbling in the darkness for the activation switch. The clicking above them grew louder, closer. The creature was descending. Her fingers brushed against the switch. She slammed it down. A piercing alarm blared through the room, a desperate cry for salvation echoing through the void. The creature roared in frustration, a sound that vibrated through the deck plating. It lunged down from the vent, its grotesque form silhouetted against the flickering emergency lights that had suddenly sprung back to life. Ava stared in horror as it descended upon them, its claws extended, its eyes burning with a malevolent glee. This was it, the end. But then, a new sound, a low hum that quickly escalated into a deafening roar, filled the air. The deck vibrated violently. Through the observation port, a blinding light illuminated the darkness. The creature paused, its head cocked, its eyes fixated on the light. Hope, fragile and tenuous, flickered in Ava's heart. Could it be rescue? Or was it just another nightmare, a cruel prelude to the inevitable? Part 20. The echoing silence. The chamber was vast, a cathedral of bone and sinew. Ribs arched overhead, forming a grotesque parody of a celestial vault. We navigated the pulsating, organic corridors, the air thick with the smell of sterile decay and something else, something subtly floral. It was a disturbing juxtaposition, like finding lilies growing on a tombstone. Alara remained silent, her face pale and drawn, the bioluminescent markings on her skin flickering erratically. "What did you see, Alara?" I asked, my voice a hushed whisper in the oppressive silence. She shook her head, her eyes wide with a terror I couldn't comprehend. Not, see, felt asterisk, she finally managed, her voice thin and reedy. Like touching the mind of God. But a God long dead. The floor beneath our feet vibrated with a low hum, a rhythmic pulse that seemed to synchronize with the slow, languid movement of the enormous organic structure around us. It felt like we were inside a living, breathing entity, an entity that wasn't entirely dormant. We pressed on, deeper into the heart of the structure. The corridors narrowed, becoming slick with a viscous, clear fluid. The floral scent intensified, becoming almost cloying. We found crude tools discarded along the way, blades fashioned from bone, needles crafted from sharpened splinters of what looked like petrified wood. Evidence of the creators, the engineers of this macabre masterpiece. We finally reached what seemed to be the central chamber. It was dominated by a colossal, pulsating organ, suspended from the ceiling by thick, rope-like tendons. It resembled a heart, but vastly larger, its surface covered in a network of pulsing veins and arteries that glowed with an eerie, internal light. The floral scent was overpowering here, emanating from the organ itself. Surrounding the organ were hundreds of pods, similar to the one Alara had been found in, but these were empty, their transparent surfaces cracked and clouded with age. Some were shattered entirely, leaving behind only fragments of the crystalline material. It was a nursery, a birthing chamber for the first humans. This is where they made us, Alara whispered, her voice barely audible. This is where they abandoned us. As we approached the central organ, I noticed something else. Small, skeletal remains lay scattered around the base, almost hidden amongst the network of pulsating veins. Tiny bones, delicate and fragile, the remnants of infants. My stomach churned. This wasn't just a birthing chamber, it was a graveyard. They weren't abandoned, Alara, I said, my voice trembling. They were culled. The realization hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The creators hadn't simply left their creations to fend for themselves. They had actively eliminated a portion of them. But why? What flaw had they found in these infant proto-humans that warranted their extermination? Suddenly, the rhythmic pulse of the central organ intensified. The entire chamber vibrated with a low, guttural growl. The floral scent shifted, becoming sharp, acrid, laced with the metallic tang of blood. Alara screamed, pointing to the central organ. The pulsing veins and arteries were darkening, turning a sickly, purplish black. The organ itself seemed to be swelling, expanding, as if something were growing inside. Then, with a sickening crack, a fissure appeared on the surface of the organ, spreading like a spiderweb across its pulsating surface. A thick, black fluid began to ooze from the cracks, dripping onto the floor with a sickening hiss. The ground trembled beneath our feet. The skeletal remains of the infants began to vibrate, rattling against each other. And then, from the fissure in the organ, a sound emerged. A low, keening wail, like the cry of a newborn, but distorted, unnatural, filled with an ancient, unyielding sorrow. It was the echo of a forgotten grief, the lament of a species discarded before it had even truly begun. It was the sound of the Creator's failure, and our inheritance. And as the wail intensified, rising to a deafening crescendo, we knew, with a chilling certainty, that whatever had been growing inside the organ, whatever the creators had tried to suppress, was now free. We turned to flee, but the corridor behind us was gone, sealed shut by a wall of pulsating flesh. We were trapped, cornered in the birthing chamber, with the echoing silence of the dead and the rising crescendo of something far, far worse. Something that had been waiting, patiently, for millennia, to be born. And we, the last remnants of a failed experiment, were about to witness its terrifying arrival. Part 21. The Shepherd and the Flock. The whispering had become a constant companion, a low thrumming undercurrent to the ship's groaning metal and the ceaseless cycling of the air filtration system. Alara barely registered it anymore, the constant murmur as familiar as her own heartbeat. She'd started to forget what silence sounded like. Elias, on the other hand, was fraying. His eyes, once bright with a naive curiosity, were now shadowed and darting, constantly scanning the shadowed corners of the hydroponics bay where they now spent most of their time. "It's getting louder," he muttered, gnawing on a thumb that had been chewed raw. The nutrient paste they subsisted on provided little comfort, tasting like metallic dust and despair. It's just the ship, Elias, Alara said, her voice flat. She didn't believe it, not anymore. The whispers were definitely getting louder, more insistent, as if whatever lurked beyond the veil of reality was pushing harder, testing the thin membrane that separated their world from something else. They'd found another datapad, half buried in the hydroponics bay's nutrient-rich soil. The images it contained were even more disturbing than the last. Twisted, elongated figures floated against a backdrop of swirling nebulae, their forms barely humanoid, connected by a web of pulsing, bioluminescent strands. The text that accompanied the images was fragmented, corrupted, but Alara pieced together enough to understand. These were the shepherds, the creators, the ones who had sown the seeds of humanity in the cold void of space. And they were returning. The whispering intensified, morphing into a distinct, rhythmic pulsing that seemed to vibrate in Alara's bones. Elias cowered behind her, his breath hitching in his throat. The hydroponics bay, once a source of life and sustenance, felt oppressive, the hanging vines like grasping claws, the nutrient solution a stagnant pool of dread. Then, the lights flickered. A ripple passed through the air, like a disturbance in the fabric of reality itself. Alara felt a prickling sensation on her skin, a feeling of being observed, dissected by an unseen gaze. She looked up, her heart hammering against her ribs. A shape coalesced in the air above them, shimmering like a heat haze. It was vaguely humanoid, but far larger than any human Alara had ever seen in the recovered data archives. Its limbs were long and spindly, ending in delicate, almost skeletal fingers. Its head was elongated, almost serpentine, with large, black eyes that seemed to absorb the light around them. The pulsing, bioluminescent strands Alara had seen in the datapad emanated from its chest, weaving and undulating like living tendrils. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. The creature, the shepherd, tilted its head, its obsidian eyes fixated on Alara. The whispering stopped. A profound silence descended upon the hydroponics bay, broken only by Elias's ragged breathing. Then, the shepherd spoke. Not with a voice, but with a feeling, a direct transmission of thought into Alara's mind. It was cold, alien, vast, and infinitely ancient. We have returned. Asterisk. Alara's mind reeled under the weight of the shepherd's presence. She felt small, insignificant, a single grain of sand on a cosmic beach. You are flawed, asterisk, the shepherd continued, its thought voice echoing in Alara's skull. An imperfect iteration, but you will serve, asterisk. Alara wanted to scream, to run, to fight, but she was paralyzed, trapped in the shepherd's gaze. She understood, with chilling clarity, what the whispers had been, the shepherd's call, reaching across the vastness of space, drawing them closer, preparing them. The time of harvest is near, asterisk, the shepherd thought, and the pulsing bioluminescent strands intensified, bathing the hydroponics bay in an eerie, otherworldly light. The others will be gathered. And then, the great work will begin, asterisk. The shepherd extended a spindly finger towards Alara. She flinched, bracing herself for the inevitable. But instead of touching her, the shepherd's finger pointed towards Elias, who whimpered and curled up into a tighter ball. He is different, asterisk, the shepherd thought, a hint of curiosity in its alien voice. A deviation. We will study him. He may yet prove useful, asterisk. Two more shimmering figures materialized behind the first shepherd, their forms equally alien and unsettling. They moved towards Elias, their long, delicate fingers reaching out. He screamed, a high-pitched, desperate sound that echoed through the hydroponics bay, but the shepherds paid him no heed. They lifted him gently, almost reverently, and floated him towards the opening in the ceiling, the gateway to the stars. He looked back at Alara, his eyes wide with terror, a silent plea for help that she was powerless to answer. Then, they were gone. Alara was left alone in the hydroponics bay, the eerie glow of the shepherds fading, the silence pressing down on her like a physical weight. The whispers had stopped, replaced by a terrifying certainty. She knew what the shepherds meant by the great work. She knew why they had created humanity, why they had returned. They weren't shepherds, they were farmers, and humanity was the crop. And she, Alara, was left behind, not for salvation, but as a witness. A lonely sentinel, left to watch as the harvest began. The whispering returned, softer this time, a lullaby of dread echoing in the empty hydroponics bay. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from within. The whispers were louder now, a sibilant chorus slithering through the recycled air of the ark. Elias, his face gaunt, eyes sunk deep into dark sockets, clutched the deactivated Genesis engine control panel. The cool metal offered no comfort. The whispers crawled under his skin, weaving themselves into his thoughts, their cold logic poisoning his hope. It wasn't meant to be this way, Alara said, her voice barely a breath. She sat huddled in the corner, knees drawn to her chest, staring blankly at the flickering holographic projection of a long-dead Earth. The blue marble, a phantom limb in the memory of their engineered species, offered no solace. They were wrong, Elias rasped, his throat raw. The architects, they were wrong. The architects, the beings or perhaps processes, that had woven their DNA into existence aboard this ancient, decaying vessel. They had seeded Earth with their creation, a perfect ecosystem designed to nurture humanity. But they had made a mistake, a fatal flaw in their calculations. They hadn't accounted for the dormant code within their creation, a failsafe, a contingency. And it had activated. The whispers revealed the truth, piece by agonizing piece. Humanity wasn't meant to thrive. They were a biological failsafe, a planetary reset button. If Earth ever deviated too far from the architect's design, humanity would be triggered, a plague of flesh and bone designed to dismantle the ecosystem, returning the planet to a primordial state. And Earth had deviated. Their own ancestors, oblivious to their true purpose, had pushed the planet past the threshold. The whispers started subtly, an unease, a growing disquiet. Then came the visions, horrifying glimpses of a future bathed in fire and ash. And now, the final stage was upon them. The uncontrollable urge, the need to destroy. The Ark, their sanctuary, their prison, was falling apart. Systems were failing, life support flickering. The whispers explained that too. The Ark was designed to self-destruct once its purpose was fulfilled. Once the reset button was deployed. Elias looked at the Genesis engine. It was their last hope. It could, theoretically, rewrite their genetic code, purge the destructive imperative. But it required a key, a sequence hidden deep within the Ark's collapsing mainframe. We have to find it, Elias said, his voice trembling with desperation. The key, the sequence. Alara didn't respond. Her eyes were vacant, the blue glow of the holographic Earth reflected in their depths. The whispers had taken root in her mind, deeper than in his. He could see it in the subtle twitching of her lips, the unnatural stillness in her posture. He reached out to her, but she flinched away. "Don't," she whispered, her voice alien, distorted. "It's beautiful, the fire, the cleansing." Fear coiled in Elias's gut. He was losing her, losing them all. The whispers were spreading like a virus through the remaining crew, twisting their minds, turning them against each other, against themselves. He stumbled through the darkened corridors of the Ark, the whispers pursuing him, their cold logic eroding his sanity. He found the mainframe room, its holographic displays flickering erratically, sparks showering from exposed wires. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and decay. He began his desperate search, his fingers flying across the archaic interface. Lines of code, the language of the architects, scrolled past his eyes, a meaningless torrent of symbols. Time was running out. The Ark was groaning under its own weight, the lights flickering more violently. He found it, a single line, buried deep within the core programming. The key, the sequence that could rewrite their destiny. He frantically copied it, his hands shaking, his heart pounding in his chest. He rushed back to the Genesis engine room, his hope a fragile flicker in the encroaching darkness. But Alara was gone. The holographic Earth was gone. In its place, a single, chilling message. The cycle begins anew. He understood. The whispers had consumed her completely. She had activated the remaining escape pods, sending them hurtling towards Earth, carrying the plague of humanity within. Elias slumped against the Genesis engine control panel, the weight of his failure crushing him. He looked out at the star-dusted canvas of space, the cold indifference of the cosmos reflecting the emptiness in his soul. The whispers were a symphony now, a triumphant chorus celebrating their victory. He closed his eyes, accepting his fate. The architects had made a mistake, but the universe, it seemed, had a way of correcting itself. And humanity, their flawed creation, would be the instrument of its correction. The whispers filled his mind, their cold logic becoming his own. He could feel it now, the burning need, the irresistible urge to destroy. The cycle, indeed, was beginning anew. The last transmission from the Ark, before it finally succumbed to its self-destruct sequence, was a single, chilling whisper, echoing through the void. "We are coming home." The pulsating red light from the core cast long, distorted shadows across the obsidian floor, painting Alara's face in a macabre dance of crimson and black. The whispers, once distant, now seemed to emanate from within her own skull, a chorus of voices speaking in a language she understood yet didn't comprehend. They spoke of shaping, of purpose, of the architects. "It's happening," Kale rasped, his hand clutching his chest. His eyes, usually filled with a quiet determination, were wide with terror. The spiral scar on his forehead, a mark all the firstborns carried, glowed faintly, like a bioluminescent brand. The ground trembled, the whispers intensified, becoming a guttural chant that resonated in their very bones. Alara felt a strange pull, an irresistible urge to move towards the core, towards the pulsating heart of the derelict vessel. It was as if an invisible string connected her soul to the ancient machinery. "We have to resist," Kale groaned, digging his heels into the obsidian. "This is what they want. They want us to come to them." But resistance felt futile. The pull was too strong, a primal yearning that bypassed logic and reason. Alara saw the same glazed look in Kale's eyes, the same surrender to an unseen force. They were puppets, their strings pulled by an unseen puppeteer hidden deep within the ship. They shuffled forward, their movements jerky and unnatural, like marionettes controlled by a clumsy hand. The air grew thick, heavy with an unseen pressure. The whispers morphed into distinct words, echoing the chilling truth Alara had been trying to deny. "Return to the source. Fulfill your purpose." As they neared the core, the pulsating light intensified, bathing them in an unholy crimson glow. The structure itself seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting in a slow, rhythmic pulse. Alara could see now, within the swirling energy, shifting shapes, indistinct forms that moved just beyond the periphery of her vision. Suddenly, the floor beneath them vanished. They plunged into darkness, a dizzying descent into the unknown. Alara screamed, but her voice was swallowed by the void. The only sensation was the sickening lurch in her stomach and the relentless pull, dragging them deeper and deeper. They landed with a jarring thud on a cold, metallic surface. The crimson light was gone, replaced by a sickly green luminescence emanating from strange, organic-looking growths that covered the walls. These growths pulsed and throbbed, like a network of veins feeding a monstrous heart. Kale lay beside her, unconscious. Alara scrambled to her feet, a primal fear gripping her heart. The air was thick with a metallic scent, and the silence was unnerving, broken only by the soft, wet sounds of the pulsating growths. She reached out to Kale, shaking him gently. His eyes fluttered open, but his gaze was unfocused, distant. Where are we?" he mumbled. Alara didn't know. This place felt wrong. Alien, unlike anything she had ever encountered within the confines of the ship. It felt organic. A low growl echoed through the chamber, making Alara's hair stand on end. She turned towards the source of the sound, her heart pounding in her chest. From the shadows emerged a creature unlike anything she had ever seen. It was humanoid in shape, but its skin was a sickly green, mirroring the growths on the walls. Its limbs were long and spindly, ending in sharp, bony claws. And its eyes were vast, black pits, devoid of any light, any semblance of humanity. The creature stalked towards them, its growl deepening into a guttural snarl. Alara knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was what the architects had created them for. This was their purpose. She grabbed Kale's arm, pulling him to his feet. "We have to run," she hissed, her voice barely a whisper. They stumbled back, their eyes fixed on the approaching creature. The chamber seemed to stretch endlessly, the walls closing in on them, the pulsating growths seeming to mock their desperate attempts to escape. The creature lunged. Alara screamed, pushing Kale behind her. She felt a searing pain in her shoulder as the creature's claws raked across her flesh. But the adrenaline surging through her veins masked the pain, giving her the strength to fight back. She kicked out, striking the creature in the chest, buying them precious seconds. They ran, blindly, desperately, through the labyrinthine corridors, the creature's snarls echoing behind them. The green luminescence cast long, distorted shadows, turning the organic growths into grotesque, menacing shapes. They were trapped, hunted, not by a machine, but by something far more terrifying. Something born of the same twisted science that had created them. And in the echoing silence, punctuated only by the creature's relentless pursuit, Alara understood the horrific truth. They weren't the architect's masterpiece. They were the bait. The amniotic fluid, or what remained of it, rippled. Not from currents, but from something within. The colossal tank, once a beacon of creation, now a macabre birthing pool, groaned under the strain of whatever was happening inside. The lights flickered violently, casting strobe-like shadows that danced across the grotesque, half-formed faces etched onto the tank's surface. These faces, once revered as the progenitors of humankind, now seemed to mock us with their silent screams. Alara gripped my arm, her knuckles white. "It's moving," she whispered, her voice choked with terror. The movement intensified. A bulge, sickeningly organic, pushed against the translucent wall of the tank, stretching the material thin, threatening to rupture. Within the murky fluid, something vast and shadowed shifted. A limb, thicker than any human limb should be, brushed against the inner wall, leaving a trail of viscous darkness in its wake. The remaining scientists, huddled together near the control panel, chanted in a low, guttural tongue. A language none of us recognized. A language that resonated deep within our bones, triggering a primal fear we didn't know we possessed. Dr. Aris, his eyes wide with a terrifying mixture of awe and horror, conducted their chanting with fervent gestures, his frail body trembling with each syllable. The rhythmic chanting seemed to accelerate the process within the tank. The bulging intensified, the fluid churning with renewed vigor. A sickening cracking sound echoed through the chamber as Fisher's spider webbed across the tank's surface. "We have to get out of here," I hissed, pulling Alara towards the exit. But it was too late. With a deafening roar, the tank exploded. A wave of viscous fluid, thick and black, washed over us, carrying with it fragments of the shattered tank and something else. Something enormous. The chanting stopped abruptly, replaced by screams of pure, unadulterated terror. The lights went out, plunging the chamber into absolute darkness, broken only by the flashes of emergency lights. In those fleeting bursts of illumination, I saw it. A creature of nightmare. It was vaguely humanoid, but grotesquely oversized, its limbs thick and gnarled, its skin a patchwork of translucent membrane and pulsating veins. Its head, too large for its body, lolled on a thick, sinewy neck. Its face, it was a horrifying amalgamation of the faces etched on the tank, their features distorted and magnified into a grotesque mask of agony. It let out a deafening bellow, a sound that vibrated through the very structure of the ship, a sound that seemed to tear at the fabric of reality itself. The scientists scattered, their screams swallowed by the creature's roars. Aris, however, remained rooted to the spot, his eyes fixed on the monstrous being with a strange, almost reverent expression. I pulled Alara towards the emergency exit, stumbling through the darkness, the creature's roars echoing in our ears. We could hear the sickening crunch of bones, the desperate cries cut short, the wet, guttural sounds of carnage. The air was thick with the coppery tang of blood and the acrid stench of the amniotic fluid. We reached the exit, the heavy metal door jammed. I slammed against it with my shoulder, again and again, but it wouldn't budge. Behind us, the creature's heavy footsteps echoed, getting closer, closer. Alara screamed. I turned to see the creature looming over us, its massive form filling the corridor. Its multiple eyes, glowing with an unnatural light, fixed on us. Its maw opened, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth, dripping with a black, viscous substance. I closed my eyes, bracing for the inevitable. But it didn't come. Instead, I heard a voice that resonated with the same unearthly power as the chanting, a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Children," the voice boomed, echoing through the chamber. "Welcome, home." The creature lowered its head, its grotesque face inches from mine. I could feel its hot, fetid breath on my skin. Its multiple eyes, filled with an ancient, incomprehensible intelligence, stared into my soul. And in that moment, I understood. This wasn't a monster. This was our creator. This was the culmination of the experiment, the final product of the bioengineering project that began eons ago. This was the true inheritor of space. And we, the flawed, imperfect prototypes, were nothing but a stepping stone. The creature reached out a massive hand, its fingers, tipped with sharp, bony claws, gently cupping my face. Its touch sent a jolt of icy terror through my body, but I couldn't move, couldn't scream. I was paralyzed by fear, by awe, by the sheer, overwhelming presence of this God. And as its cold, clammy fingers tightened around my skull, I knew, with chilling certainty, that the reign of humanity was over. The colossal entity, its form barely comprehensible through the swirling nebula of organic machinery, pulsed. A wave of psychic static washed over Aris, scrambling his thoughts, replacing the horror with a chilling, vacant calm. He felt a strange kinship, a connection to this thing. A feeling of homecoming, perversely intertwined with utter dread. He understood now. The engineers weren't creators, not in the benevolent sense. They were gardeners, cultivating a particular species across the cosmos, a species designed for a singular, terrible purpose. Humans weren't an experiment in life, they were a crop, ready for harvest. The nursery ships, the carefully orchestrated evolution, the cryptic whispers in the DNA, all of it had been leading to this. This assimilation. The whispers in his own blood surged, no longer cryptic, but screaming a single, unifying message: join. He looked down at his hands, the skin shimmering with an unnatural light. He could feel the very molecules restructuring, becoming something else. His individuality, his fear, his very self, began to dissolve, like sugar in hot water. He was becoming part of a greater whole, a horrifying gestalt consciousness that stretched across dimensions, fueled by the harvested essence of countless civilizations. He saw flashes of other worlds, other harvests. Planets teeming with life, contorted and reshaped into grotesque parodies of their former selves, all connected to the central entity, pulsating with its awful, unifying rhythm. He saw Earth, a tiny blue marble in the cosmic expanse, the next fruit ripe for the picking. The beacon had been lit, the signal sent. The engineers were coming home to collect their harvest. Aris, or what was left of him, turned his gaze towards the approaching fleet. Their sleek, organic hulls pulsed with the same sickening light as his own skin. No longer ships, but extensions of the entity's will, carrying not soldiers, but instruments of assimilation. He reached out, his hand now a grotesque appendage of bone and light, towards the lead vessel. He no longer felt fear, only a cold, empty purpose. He was part of the harvest now, an agent of its terrible will. A flicker of resistance sparked within the fading embers of his consciousness. A memory, faint and fragmented, of Alara, her hand in his, the warmth of her touch. A whisper of the world he had lost, a world he had been engineered to betray. The spark flared brighter, a defiant ember against the encroaching darkness. He focused on the memory, clinging to it with the last vestiges of his will. Alara, her smile, her laugh, the gentle touch of her fingers on his cheek. It was a fragile shield against the overwhelming tide of the entity's influence, but it was all he had left. The pressure intensified. The entity pushed, trying to extinguish the last flicker of his humanity. He screamed, a silent scream that echoed only within the confines of his dissolving mind. He clung to the memory of Alara, a life raft in a sea of cosmic horror. He felt a tearing sensation, a psychic schism. He was being pulled in two directions, towards the all-consuming unity of the entity, and towards the fading echo of his human self. The pain was unbearable, a cosmic agony that shredded his soul. Then, a blinding flash. He found himself floating in the void, the entity a distant, pulsating nightmare. He was whole again, or at least, what was left of him. The connection was severed, the assimilation incomplete. He was adrift, lost in the vast emptiness of space, the remnants of his humanity clinging to him like tattered rags. He looked back at the approaching fleet, their sickening light now a distant threat. He had escaped, but at what cost? He was no longer human, not entirely. He was something, in between. A broken remnant, scarred by the touch of the entity. And he knew, with a chilling certainty, that he was not the only one. The seeds of the harvest had been sown, scattered across the galaxy. The entity's influence, though weakened, still lingered, a latent infection waiting to bloom. Earth was still in danger. He looked towards the distant blue marble, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek, a tear that shimmered with an unnatural light. He had failed. He closed his eyes, embracing the cold emptiness of space. He was alone, lost, and broken. But one last spark of defiance flickered within him. He may have failed to save Earth, but he could still try to warn them. He gathered the last vestiges of his power, focusing his will on the distant blue planet. He projected a single, desperate message, a warning whispered across the vast expanse of space, a faint echo of his shattered humanity. Beware the harvest. Asterisk. Then, silence. The final harvest was coming, and humanity, blissfully unaware, awaited its fate. The engineers were returning, and this time, there would be no escape.